Hi guys, today we have a lawyer. He is corporate and intellectual property lawyer. So today I will ask him lots of questions, and I know for sure that this information is useful for anyone who is going to take pictures, videos of the people on the street or whoever. Today I will ask lots of questions. Hi Ilya. So
Hi,
can
Viky.
you introduce yourself to my audience?
Hi everybody, I'm Ilya Zlotkin. I own a firm called Zlotkin Wong. I do corporate and intellectual property law, and in particular I focus on entertainment, software, and hospitality industries.
So today, first I want to ask you questions which are related to everybody in this country and particularly in Illinois. So I want to ask you about taking pictures of the people in public and private places. So what can you tell us?
Sure. So the question that comes up a lot of the time when there's a question about the person who's taking the videos and photos, and then there's a question about the people, if there are people who are going to appear in the videos and photos. So for the photographer or the videographer, the primary question is, are you allowed to be there, right? So if you're on the street, and it's in a public place, so you're not behind, some fence with barbed wire or anything like that, or behind an area where you're not supposed to be. If you're not on private property, you are allowed to be taking pictures. The question is, of what, right? There's a difference between taking photos and let's say you're out in nature and you're taking photos of mountains. You don't have to worry about, are you allowed to do that? If you're taking photographs of people's houses, then there's some additional questions that come up that are going to be worth discussing. Certainly if you're taking pictures of other people, that's where the questions come up about, okay, well, what kind of rights of those people are coming into play when you're taking that photo? So most individuals, they have, at least this is for the US, right? So in the US, and this might also vary state by state, but generally people have a right of privacy. They also have a right of publicity, and they also have certainly a right not to be defamed.
Oh, wow.
And then also a right not to be portrayed in a false light. So right of privacy, as it suggests, it's a question of, well, does an ordinary, reasonable person, should they have an expectation of that whatever it is that's going on at a particular moment isn't going to be disclosed, or particular facts about their life aren't going to be disclosed because they're offensive, again, to this reasonable, ordinary person, which of course doesn't actually exist. It's a fiction created by the courts that takes into account all these norms of society, and who knows whether one judge is going to think that something is offensive or would be offensive to a reasonable, ordinary person, while somebody else might not. And then there's the jury, right, which the jury is what, I guess, altogether determines what's acceptable in society, right? So it's a very theoretical discussion about what this reasonable person is, but then there might be some case law from many years before that says, okay, well, this was found to be acceptable in a particular situation, not an acceptable way to approach things in another situation. And so that's really where a lot of this analysis comes in. But of course, people just want to know an answer and not have to worry about it all the time. And so generally, a sidewalk is a public place. Right? And so a person who is walking on a sidewalk, they do not have a reasonable expectation of privacy.
So anybody can take a picture of that person and can be published anywhere? Because it is a public place.
This is in relation to the right of privacy, and there's going to be some nuances with just doing that if some of these other rights that I mentioned earlier are going to come into play. But as a very general statement, yes. Now there's certainly a question about underage children and whether they should be portrayed if they're captured on a sidewalk. And the best practice would be not to portray them even if they're in a public place.
But can you tell us why exactly?
Sure, of course. Because children cannot consent. right? So, and technically in the US at least, people under the age of 18 cannot consent. Well, that's a very broad statement. It actually is going to vary state by state what the age of consent is or age of majority is. In all states, 18 is, I guess, the maximum age at which somebody can enter into a contract and consent to certain things, which is why if children are the subject of a particular show or documentary, written consent should be obtained from the parents because the parents can consent on behalf of the child, right? On the other hand, if you just capture a kid on the street and there's no consent from a parent, but even if the child says yes, the child technically cannot say yes.
Unless he or she is 18 years old, correct?
In all states, that'll be the case. In some states, the age of consent is less. It might be 16, and for different things as well, right? Obviously, there's the sex question. Then there's also other entering into contract questions, and that will vary state by state.
And what about paparazzi? I remember that we talked about taking picture of the people on the street, but what about celebrities when there are photographers who are waiting for celebrities outside their house, but they are taking pictures on a public place, not in their house? What would you say about those situations when paparazzis are waiting for celebrities? They have a right or not?
Yes, assuming that they're in a public place and that they're not. There was an episode of Lucifer. It's a nice show where they showed a paparazzi that ran somebody off the road trying to take photographs and killed somebody in the process. It's a fiction. It's a TV show, but that's not reasonable, and that's in the car, et cetera, et cetera. If we're talking about again these same principles of is there a right of privacy that's being violated? Because there's a photographer, forget whether we're calling them a paparazzi, because that's just a designation for a particular type of photographer. But if we're just thinking about somebody's in a public place and they're allowed to be there and they're not capturing anything that somebody has a reasonable expectation not to have captured, then they're fine. Now with celebrities, and this is true, what is a celebrity? But public officials, and certainly who you would typically think about as a celebrity, they will have a harder time enforcing this right of privacy than if someone is not a public figure.
But why will they have a harder time?
Because in the US at least, there's the First Amendment, and there's this concept or thinking at least that the public has a right to know. Right, and there's a question of what is it that the public truly has a right to know, right? Nobody should be capturing video through the window of somebody's house. Nobody should be hiding in somebody's bathroom taking photographs.
If, for example, I take a telescopic lens and I can take a photo of a person who is on the private property, let's say in the garden, but I have telescopic lens and I can take a video or photo of that person. So will I violate their rights or not?
It's going to be harder if it's a public figure. So again, with this thinking, it's harder for the victim, right, to enforce their rights if they're a public figure. So again, with this thinking of the public has a right to know, the thinking is, okay, these people, because they're public figures, have waived certain rights, and you still cannot be telling lies about somebody. That's what defamation relates to, right? The common parlance might be libel or slander, but legally we're talking about defamation, and that's making false statements about somebody, right? And so making a false statement about a celebrity even, or a public figure, for those public figures, there's an additional element that they will have to prove. They don't have to prove just that it's a lie and that it somehow hurt them, right? They have to prove that the statement was made with what's called actual malice.
What is actual malice?
It's a legal term that right? But really, it's an element of intent, right? And it's not just being careless. It's about having a level of ill intent to try to tell lies about somebody, right, and hurt them through that. With private figures, you don't have that element. intent doesn't really come into it as much, and there's just a question of, is it false what you're saying? Did you publish it to somebody else, or did you say it to somebody else? Did you hurt them, right? And then there's even a smaller category of things that, again, these laws will vary state by state, but there's a smaller category of things about which, if you say a false fact about somebody and you publish it to a third party, the figure that you said it about, they don't even have to prove that they were hurt by it, because there's presumption that they were. It's like defamation per se is the legal term for what this means, and it relates to, you know, saying that somebody committed adultery, or that people had sex together when they didn't, or that somebody's sick with some communicable disease, you know, that somebody has AIDS, or lying about the integrity of somebody in their business, right? So at the same time, opinions, if they're truly opinions, are protected, and they're not statements of fact. And if it's obvious that something is not a statement of fact, then it's not going to be defamation, right?
Guys, I think that Ilya answered lots of questions which are really useful, and I'm really thankful that you joined my video production and you answered all these questions which are really important even for me, because I'm a foreigner. I didn't know lots of stuff, so thank you so much, and I hope to see you soon.
Sure. Thank you.
Guys, don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to give me likes, and if you have some questions, just write them in the comment section below, and I also will add Ilya's contacts under the video.